It all started with an anonymous note. "Frank, Dan was seen with your wife. Check it out." That was all it said. Did I need anything else? Proof of my own validity? Of course. I work for a large corporate retail conglomerate. I'm vice president of distribution. Dan works for the same company as a regional manager, based in the corporate headquarters of a local chain. He's the boss of lesser bosses, but he wasn't my boss. Dan is a flashy Mexican with a lot of piss and vinegar, climbing up the ladder of well-deserved success. We both report to the vice president and president, so technically we are equals. However, Dan dreams of a more glamorous position as a corporate headquarters employee, and he gets it. He's so capable. Debbie is my wife. She is completely different from Dan's wife, Cindy, and I would not consider her for an extramarital affair. Debbie is full-bodied, busted because of her weight, hippie, and chubby, but muscular, like a dyke softball player. She's a curly blonde with brown eyes. Most guys would find her too fat to look at, just being honest. Despite her full figure, she's not ugly. Cindy, on the other hand, is skinny. When God was putting her parts together, he basically dipped some bones in blood, gave them some flesh, and threw her into the world. To quote an interesting Pearl Jam lyric, she was skinny, but she couldn't be a model. Her breasts were small cup-sized, and she was short in stature, about the same blonde hair color as Debbie, with sparkling blue eyes. Much prettier than Debbie. I know all this because I met her at church. Yeah, that bastard Dan and his pretty wife are parishioners of our church. We had dinner together with another corporate couple and sometimes at church events. I don't want to tell you a story about how turned on I got when I saw my wife having fun with some hot man, because I didn't. I also didn't rush out to beat Dan so that his nose was broken, nor did I rush out to beat Debbie so that her mother wouldn't recognize her face. That doesn't mean I can't use violence to get my point across. But I wanted to get it across in a way that wouldn't fade over time like a bruise. Personally, violence in response to cheating is irrelevant to me, and I don't agree with those sick people who think cheating justifies all kinds of brutal violence, including murder. Screw them. Perhaps it's my church background. However, I don't think my pastor would approve of the steps I took to get revenge. Well, to hell with it. My proof? I looked at her credit card receipts. There were a few unusual ones that defied explanation. Purchases at men's stores that I couldn't identify. I hadn't received any gifts from her lately, but someone had. And most unpleasant of all, 2 bills at the Three Oaks Motel. I knew this motel. It was close to the office. There were many steps in developing my strategy. My plan was to get close to Dan at the office. I chatted with him a lot, trying to gather enough details to make my move. The brat was acting very calm. I wouldn't have suspected anything. His eyes didn't wink at me. He didn't strut around me like a proud rooster. He didn't make any remarks about my wife. When I told him that my wife really liked him and suggested that we combine families, he didn't blink an eye. That meant he was happy having sex with my wife and was going to keep it a secret. Bastard. A few things fell into place, enough to make me think I had a chance to do something about it. First, Dan mentioned that he was trying to finish installing new kitchen cabinets by next week. Second, the company was sending him to Nevada for a 2-week training course next week. Third, our pastor recently talked about how we should be neighbors to each other and that men should be willing to help our neighbors with chores at any time. This was part of a message of sacrifice that made many of us men secretly smirk at each other about the consequences for a messy mind. Yes, our Protestant denomination issued a nationwide edict about this about 15 years ago. We laugh every time it comes up in the message. I was looking forward to the rest of the week. I asked Dan if he was going to let Cindy put the paper on the shelves in the cabinets he was almost finished installing. He waved at me as if he cared more about finishing the shelves than papering them. Okay. Friday. I wondered if Debbie would be so bold. But that didn't happen on Friday. Sunday morning, she got a call. "Frank, honey?" she asked with concern in her voice. "Yes." I answered from the workbench in the back room. I fiddled with the hinge and did nothing, just waiting. My Aunt Laura had emergency surgery on her arm. She needs me to help her for a couple of weeks. So I said I'd come over. "Oh? Is that serious?" I think she said staff. I fiddled with the noose some more, pleased. Think you can make it here without me for a couple of weeks? Huh? She picked an aunt we never see, and it just so happens to be a 2-week recovery? Yeah, that's right. She was headed to Nevada. Guaranteed. Of course, sweetie. Don't worry about me. Oh, thanks. She smiled. You're welcome, honey. I thought to myself. Just try to remember to come home after 2 weeks of constant sex. Just be careful on the road, I said. She kissed me and went to get ready. A few minutes later, I followed her. When I heard her go into the bathroom and close the door, I checked her suitcase. It was a good thing she wasn't in the room, or she might have guessed that I knew everything. Her suitcase was full of the most revealing clothes. Why would she need Aunt Laura's panties? On Monday, I called in sick. I went to the local DIY center and scored a bunch of shelf paper. I knew Cindy loved the color pink, so I picked out some with pink roses. I knocked on her door a little after 9 in the morning. Cindy answered, wearing what looked like homemade clothes. A white blouse rolled up and knotted just below her small breasts. Khaki shorts with loose cuffs complemented it, and she had her blonde hair gathered into a ponytail. Frank, she smiled. Hi. Dan wanted to surprise you with the paper and asked me to help since he needs to get to class. I smiled and shrugged. Oh, well. She lowered her gaze to herself and walked back into the house. You know Dan. When he wants to do something, he better do it now. I rolled my eyes. Anyway, I'm here to help you in the name of neighborly self-sacrifice and all that. Well, okay. Yeah, I know Dan. I don't want to disappoint him. She scoffed at the harshness. But I knew she was a little afraid of him and his hot-headedness. It was all too easy. For now, we had coffee first, and I made sure she noticed me smiling at her. I gave her a few compliments and mimicked her posture. It was an old trick from the realm of hypnosis and body language to evoke sympathy in the other person's subconscious. When I moved on to complimenting her looks, she blushed, but I was careful not to go overboard. We started the project and worked on it until lunchtime. When we took a break, I suggested we get something to eat, and she agreed. On the way back, with a few sandwiches, I stopped by the liquor store and bought some cider. Have you ever tried alcoholic cider? It's delicious and light enough to drink a few glasses before you realize you're addicted to the taste. She asked what kind of cider it was, and I told her it was an old-fashioned product that contained almost no alcohol. She tried it and liked it. I defiantly picked up the bottle each time, and Dan's petite, 28-year-old wife fell for it and started drinking. For me, I made sure to finish the bottle before I finished the sandwich so I could open another one for us. She didn't eat the entire portion, but she drank the second bottle. That would be enough, but I would make sure we drank another one while stacking paper. After the third bottle, as she stood up on the chair to stack the paper on the top shelf, I saw her lose her balance. She wouldn't have fallen, but I supported her anyway, putting my hands on her hips just under the hem of her shorts. I kept my hands there to make sure she was steady. Be careful, Cindy, I said, distracting her from my hands, which were still on her legs. I squeezed them lightly and stroked them. I think I'm feeling a little dizzy, and my back hurts. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I stepped back. Come down from there. She turned and looked down, but I stepped forward to block her. I reached my hands around her waist and helped her down. I put her very close to me and looked into her eyes for a few seconds. I know what it takes. Turn around. She blinked but turned around. I continued to massage her, working the muscles in her shoulders and back. I paid special attention to the muscles of her neck. She purred happily. You have a knot in your back that needs to be worked out. Come over to the couch. I led her over to the couch and sat her down. I stood behind her and began working on her again. Lie down. She looked back at me with her first questioning look of the day. Don't worry. I'll get this knot out in no time. She reluctantly lay face down. I gave her a good massage. When she relaxed and started purring with pleasure, I slid my hands under her blouse from behind. She stopped purring and froze but didn't say anything. When I made no more threatening movements, she relaxed again. I pulled myself up on the couch and, kneading her back, began rubbing her back muscles. When I moved on to working with my nails, she let out a moan. Then I finished. Disappointment was written all over her face. You know what would really help? Your hot tub. We could have some more cider and relax for a while before we get back to work. I don't know. Cindy looked hesitant. 15 minutes in the hot tub, with some cider and a little more massage, and you'll be good as new. She pressed her lips together. I'd be a bad neighbor if I didn't offer. But if you want to get back to work, we can get right to it. I started walking toward the kitchen. No, I think we should rest in the tub first. She stood up and beckoned me over. Come upstairs, and I'll get you some swim trunks. 15 minutes later, we were already climbing into the hot tub. We each held a cider in our hands and avoided looking at each other as we climbed in. Decency and all that, you know. But I did peek a few times. She was wearing the only swimsuit she had mentioned before. It was a bright yellow two-piece that covered almost nothing. She was so skinny that her hip bones were sticking out. I like a little more meat, but better bones than my cow wife. What made Dan sleep with my wife? Does he have a thing for fat women? Why did he marry Cindy if that was the case? We sipped cider and chatted. I made sure Cindy was laughing, that she was relaxed and at ease. When we finished the third bottle, I invited her in for a massage. Sit in front of me, and I'll make sure your back doesn't bother you again today. She didn't hesitate to sit between my legs, her back to me. I worked on her for a while but moved closer every now and then. Steam rose around us as I ran my hands over her skin, as I inhaled and exhaled into her ear. She pressed back against me. It was time. Time to get back to work, I said. She groaned in frustration. We walked out, and I followed her upstairs, stopping outside the guest room. I watched her backside sway as she headed for the bedroom. I silently followed her and then rubbed her shoulder. She turned around and threw herself into my arms. I didn't give her a chance. I kissed her before she could say anything. She resisted for about 4 seconds, but then gave in and kissed me back. When I broke the kiss, she gasped. Oh, Frank, we can't. I pushed her back onto the bed. I can't do this. I'm married. We can't. Don't worry. I'll stop in a few seconds. Just enjoy this and we'll stop. We made love. After that came a time of heated arguments and tears. She wanted to know what she should do, how it happened, what Dan would think. My answers were not soft. Dan won't find out about it because you know what would happen if he did. Dan had a temper. He beat Cindy mercilessly. He beat her beyond recognition, if not to death. Cindy was his property. Once she crossed that line in her relationship with me, she gave Dan an excuse to kill her if he wanted to. No, she didn't tell him. I didn't tell her that Dan was involved with my wife. Nor did I tell her that I intended to get her pregnant. I wanted Dan to have to raise my child. I told her I would stay until Dan got back, and that's exactly what happened. I stayed with Cindy and slept with her every day in their marital bed. She entertained herself willingly, afraid that if she didn't, I would tell Dan, and her life would be over. After 2 days of sex, she began to enjoy herself again. Dan's little wife had turned into a great one. If she doesn't get pregnant from 2 weeks of constant sex, I'll have to go back and keep trying. The bastard will have to raise my child. Now what to do about Debbie?